um, and they would just kind of change angle and move a little bit, but no numbers or letters or anything I recognized that way. There was a big lever there, and I moved it, and it moved the star pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really disorienting because, these stars were all around me, so that was kind of like my visual reference. And I was unsteady on my feet. I was already a little bit tipped. And so that kind of made me dizzy, and I resolved not to mess with that one anymore. But I was thinking about pushing another button, thinking I would open a door, when something caught my attention from the door that I'd come through. And I turned, and there was a human standing there. At least I thought he was a human. And, this was the most welcome sight to me at this point, because I thought that somebody was there to rescue me, that this was some kind of police or military or, something, NASA maybe. I wasn't thinking too clearly, but, it was much more close-fitting than you would see in a... Well, he was wearing blue coveralls, Air Force jumpsuit, but he had this helmet on, and I was just babbling, yelling questions, and he wasn't answering, but I thought because of the helmet that maybe he couldn't hear me or couldn't talk with it on. And so when he wanted me to go with him, I was only too glad to go, figuring he was going to take me out of this place. So I went with him, and he took me out of there, and through what I take was probably an airlock. And I don't know if the craft was there the whole time or if it was just there at this point, but when the other door slid back, it was so much brighter, and the air was so much easier to breathe. It was really quite a relief. It was, the light was much more like sunlight, too. And he took me out of the craft, which was parked inside of this huge room, kind of an airplane hangar kind of a thing, because the ceiling had these translucent panels that, sloped down into one wall. So the room was shaped kind of like a quarter of a cylinder, turned on its side, and the ceiling and one wall were giving off light. I don't know whether these were light fixtures that gave off light that was like sunlight, or if it was just panels and sunlight was shining on them. I tried to look around, but he seemed to be in a hurry, and he was leading me along, and I was stumbling because I was still pretty weak and unsteady on my feet. The ceiling was quite high, and there was some other craft in there, disc-shaped craft. I didn't see any airplanes or anything conventional craft, but these other craft were more rounded and sort of more chrome or reflective-like. But I didn't really get a chance to look that much, so I don't know how many there were exactly, but he hurried me out of this room, this hangar, down a hallway. And I was getting pretty anxious about why I wasn't getting any information, any answers, That it really put my mind at ease quite a bit to be in his company and away from the creatures and out of that humid, dark place. Then he took me into this room, and there were some other people dressed like him, except they weren't wearing helmets. So I thought, that maybe now they could hear me and they could answer my questions. Well, that's kind of an exaggeration about my thinking, because it wasn't all that clear. I was really kind of foggy-headed and just full of panic.
Yeah.
And so, when I repeated these questions, I was basically yelling and screaming like a maniac. He left me with them, and they started to try to put me down on the table. And that's when I got suspicious about, was I really rescued, and were these, were they there to help me at all, So I started to try to resist, which didn't do me a whole lot of good because I was still so weak. See, they were close enough. They had a tight grip on me, and I was struggling. I was too weak to pull loose, but there were three of them, and they were so much stronger than me. And but when I'd yell, I could see a little wince in their face. So I know they could hear me, but they didn't seem the slightest bit inclined to answer me or, show much emotion or anything.
Right.
I was able to jerk one hand free and get it under the edge of the mask. They put this mask over my face. It was kind of like an oxygen mask, which I think was, something designed to knock me out. Because even though I got my finger under it, I just blacked out just that fast. I don't think I fainted. I think it was the mask that did it. I just went out real fast. And I don't know, where this conscious period was, during this experience, whether it was at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. But the next thing I remembered was waking up, and I came to pretty quickly. I was still in quite a bit of pain in my head and chest, but not nearly as bad as before. But it was cold air, and I could tell it was outside, and I was lying face down with my head on my arm, and there was a light above me, and I looked to see where the light was coming from. And I looked up, and I could see the bottom of this craft hovering there. And it seemed like I could feel warmth coming from it. But just as soon as I put my eyes to where the light was coming from, it went out. So I don't know whether the light was like propulsion or a light fixture or hatch closing, but it was just hovered there for a second in the dark. I could see everything reflected in this silvery hull before it just shot up into the sky. Just was gone from sight so fast. It was just incredible. You'd think it would just break the sound barrier or something, but it was basically silent. It kind of stirred the air a little bit, and the leaves and the branches moved. But the next thing, I just went from looking up into the sky and seeing that nothing but stars to looking around, and I recognized where I was. I was standing beside the highway outside the town, nearest where this had happened. Anyway, I was still wearing the same clothes I'd been wearing at work, but it was cold. But I wasn't really thinking about that. I was thinking about getting some help. I ran down across the first bridge, and the first building I came to was lit inside, and there was smoke coming out of the chimney. And so I pounded on the door, and nobody came. I ran on down across the next bridge, and I came to a service station, and there was a row of phone booths there. And I went in and picked up the receiver, and it was dead. And that was really a sinking feeling. But I went into the next one, the middle one, and it worked. But you don't have to have, or didn't at that time, a coin to talk to the operator. So I was able to make a collect call to my family. And first they took it to be some kind of a prank.
Oh, really?
They started to hang up on me.
Wow.
And I screamed, "No, it's me. And for something, and I was able to convince them. And they said, okay, my brother-in-law said, I'll get your brother, and I'll come and get you.
At this time, did you have a sense yet as to how long you had been gone?
No, I thought it was the same night. So when they picked me up, and that was kind of weird, too, because I collapsed there, and it seemed like hardly any time before they were there, but it had to be at least 45 minutes. Anyway, they picked me up and put me in the truck, and I tried to tell them about what happened, and it was just so horrible. I just kept breaking down. Somehow in the conversation, it came out about how much time had gone by. Because I said something, that made them understand that I thought this was still the same night. And they said, no, try to feel your face. And and I had this growth of beard, and I looked at my watch, and it had changed the date, and man, that for some reason really just kind of finished me off, you know.
Yeah.
It had been a pretty rough
Right.
time,
Mm-hmm.
and the family had been getting all these weird calls. You know, that was part of the reason they were going to hang up on me, is they had a lot of crank calls. Well, you know, this one lady said she was a nurse, and she'd been working in a hospital, and this old couple had had an experience like what I'd experienced, but when she came back on shift, the couple was gone, their records were gone, and everybody was trying to act like they hadn't been there. So
Wow.
she was saying, just be careful who gets a hold of him when he gets returned.
Wow.
And they had a call from a guy that said he was retired CIA that said the same thing. So the family was pretty leery about, you know, just taking me off to the sheriff and saying, well, here he is, we found him. You know,
Yeah.
they were, you know, untrusting of the authorities.
Oh, wow. I had not heard of that part before.
Yeah, so rather than taking me right to the sheriff, my brother took me to Phoenix and tried to get some medical tests done right away. And that was kind of interesting. There was quite a battery of tests, but first kind of got diverted to some phony ufologist guy that they sort of represented in the movie. Some rather strange people that weren't who they claimed they were. You know, the guy representing himself to be a doctor, couldn't do any tests, but finally got hooked up with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. They organized a whole bunch of tests. So I had EKG, EEG, blood tests, urinalysis, upper body X-rays, whole battery of tests that went on. You know, there was additional tests added later, but one of the things that was, you know, people tried to explain it away with right off the bat was that it was all a drug hallucination. So that was the reason these blood and urine samples were put through the county medical examiner's drug screen, showed no trace of any drug. And so the same thing with the theory that I'd had a transitory psychosis, that I'd, you know, temporarily gone insane. Imagine that this had happened to me, and then come back to normal.
Right.
Well, the psychiatric test showed a perfectly normal pattern of scores. But, you know, what's really stupid is that all of these theories, and there was another theory that the hypnotist had led me during hypnosis to believe that this had happened to me.
Yeah.
But none of that squares with how 6 other men shared my hallucination.
Right.
You know, nothing the hypnotist could have done to me would have had any effect on the rest of the crew.
Yeah.
The same thing with transitory psychosis. Did the whole crew have a transitory psychosis?
Right.
You know, did they all hallucinate? You know,
Right.
It's just
that doesn't
it's
work.
just totally absurd. Nobody asked the question, how do 7 people have the same delusion?
Yeah, before we're done, I wanted to make sure people got to hear the full story of what really happened on the craft, because that's the main part that's different from the movie. And I also wanted to clear someone's name, because you hear a lot of times it was the director who did it, director to change shit, and the director was Tracy Torme, who did not.
No, that was the screenwriter. He wrote it. The changes came in later, and I'm not sure who added those changes or asked that they be made. But originally, I agreed to do it with the understanding they were going to stay true to the story. And it's only after, you know, so each person that becomes involved, another co-producer, the director of the studio, and each person gets creative control to a greater and greater degree. And me least of all. I never approved those changes. And as a matter of fact, the part aboard the craft where they changed things the most wasn't even in the script that I got. And so, you know, I was really pretty disappointed about that.
And so was Tracy Torme, right? He was very upset about the changes.
Yeah, he was, and he did his best to try to get them to stay with the real story, and he was successful to a certain extent.